Hello again, and welcome back to the Fear and Beer podcast, where we talk all things horror, horror nights, and just a dash of beer. I'm Nick.
And I'm Shamus.
All right, welcome back to the Fear and Beer podcast. This is episode 4. I'm Nick.
I'm Shamus.
And before we get started off, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's actually listened. I didn't really think it would take off, or maybe it even hasn't taken off yet, but the numbers for us seem pretty cool that this many people are listening, whether it's just friends, family, or even people that stumble upon us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, all those different platforms that we have. It's pretty cool to see that we've got some traction, I guess, so to speak.
I mean, from all the things I've seen on our social media so far, it's pretty cool to get the comments that we've been getting. Shout out to those that have left us messages and comments saying that you like the podcast. Keep listening to it, rating us, and thumbs up all our episodes. It's the only way it'll really push us in their algorithm. So the more people that listen, the more people that like it, the more it'll get pushed to other people that are looking for this type of thing. So wanted to say thanks to all y'all.
Yeah, so a couple things that we've been working on. So if you couldn't tell from our first 3 podcasts, we've just been doing it on a single mic, USB style. So we finally figured a way out. This is all new to us, but we finally figured a way to connect 2 mics. So we're actually recording like a real podcast should be, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, it won't sound like we're passing the mic back and forth anymore.
Yeah,
and a little bit less, call and answer type deal. But
yeah.
It'll be nice to kind of if he says something, I can just butt in.
Yeah, not as much.
Versa.
And what do you think about that? Moves mic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we'll see. This is definitely a step in the right direction, and we're definitely trying to work out. We're going to probably try and get some new mics soon, just so we can cut down on all those really annoying S-pops, P-pops, and stuff like
once
that.
Once we get more professional.
Yeah.
We're really amateur still.
This is just 2 guys recording in a bedroom on laptops using Audacity. So it's just pretty much just something to kill time for us to do while we're waiting for Horror Nights to start up.
Right, so part of this podcast, like we've said before, there is a beer element to it. So today I'm drinking what's called Ghost in the Machine by Parish Brewing. They are a brewery outside of Broussard, Louisiana. I actually haven't had them before. This apparently is kind of like their flagship IPA. It's a double, unfiltered. It's supposed to be really, really good. So I'm going to give this one a whirl and see what happens. And Nick's just drinking a Wachusett.
Wachusett blueberry, baby.
That could be, well, I don't know, blueberry, is that fall? I don't know.
I drink this all year round, so this one's not as themed for today. Maybe I'll try and find a way to cue it in at some point, but for me, this is just my overall favorite beer from back home. Wachusett's just a brewery from a couple towns over from where I live, and a couple weeks ago I flew up to Connecticut and drove my friend down who just moved down to Orlando as well. And since I was driving to Florida, I got to actually take a couple cases of local beers back home with me. So that was really, really cool.
Yeah, Wachusett's good stuff. You can find it, I think, in if anywhere in the Northeast.
Yeah.
I don't know how far it distributes, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, granted, everybody knows that if you're a beer drinker, there isn't millions of beers that theme around Halloween and horror and all that good stuff.
Some will be a stretch.
So we're gonna try our best to try to theme it, but I don't know. I like drinking beer, so I may just bring something random in one day. You never know what I might find.
Yeah. So before we get started with what we're going to discuss this episode, which we're going to get into the icons of Halloween Horror Nights past, we're going to kind of go down the list in chronological order, kind of give a quick little bio about each one. If you've frequented these events and you've consider yourself a Horror Nights buff, then this might not be the episode that you need to listen to. And for us, because like we said, we're somewhat new to the event as well, this is going to be more for us to really dive into these characters so we have a better understanding as well. Before that, though, I want to talk about some rumors and some news that kind of broke a couple days ago for us. We're recording this on Sunday, so by the time this drops on Friday, that news could be debunked or proven accurate. I'm expecting some Horror Nights news shortly just because it seems like we're getting closer and closer. The parks have been opening, and I actually went the other day, and it seemed pretty good the way they are social distancing people, so they're on the right track of things. So this event shouldn't be in any jeopardy, so to speak.
I mean, my family and I, my wife and I took our kids to Universal when they did the soft opening for the pass holders, and it was actually pretty well done as far as I could tell, with how they did the social distancing and thing like you said. So it's good that you went on a day when they actually did full opening to see what it was like. I can't imagine, just from my own point of view, that even with a full open theme park, it's going to be as busy as it would be normally, just because of the fact that there's still a lot of people that aren't going to make the trip because they're not going to risk it. They're not going to say, we can always do it next year. So even with Halloween Horror Nights this year, I could potentially see this year kind of be not dead, but not anywhere near the levels of visitors that we see in years past.
Yeah, sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit, baby.
Well, that's the way I look at it, but we live 20 minutes from there, so.
Yeah, it's a lot easier for us to just stone's throw away, head over there. All right, so these rumors that just came out a couple days ago, there's a handful of them. I'm not sure. I believe they kind of surfaced on some of the discussion boards from...
I haven't seen these yet. So.
Yeah, some reputable sources. There we go. Spit that one out. So we'll kind of go down the list. I think Shamus heard about one.
Yeah, so one thing I read, and I think it came from a couple different sources, and these are like actual, I don't know the exact webpage that it was on, but these are, I think, stories coming from just interviews with the park itself. Universal is probably going to start limiting the number of people that can get in day to day, and I think they already have been, and we can only assume that if that's the case, come September, my guess is that they'll do the same for all of their additional events, Halloween Horror Nights being one of those. So just as a recommendation from us, if you are planning on going to it, obviously if you're local, it's probably a little bit easier for you because you can kind of just pick and choose what day to go. But if you're someone that, like us, gets a frequent fear pass and wants to go 3 or 4 nights a week, you want to make sure you keep an eye out and buy them as soon as they go on sale, because they're probably only going to limit so many of those to so many people. Like I said before, I don't think this year is going to be a heavy trafficked event with people from out of state, but it may mean more people from in-state are going to take the opportunity to come. So just make sure you look for those when they go on sale, because they may sell out quick. Yeah, and
one of the things that I saw and heard about for keeping people in, sort of groups, so to speak, is there's going to be, I guess, an app. The app is pretty much going to dictate what you're going to do and see that day. So if you get the Fear Express or that Fast Pass, so to speak, it's going to open up the app for you to actually pick which ones you want to go to. If you just have the freaking Fear Pass and you don't pick that Express Pass, Jack is going to actually take over the app and kind of control your night.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, you're gonna select a couple attractions, either shows or rides that you would like to get done, and it's going to assess the groups, so to speak, and try and plan the night for you. I guess the overall theme of it is Jack is taking over your night, and there's nothing you can do about it. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, from a frequent Fear Pass perspective, it's cool for us. I feel for the people that don't have the ability to come every night, or if they're out of town, they only get one night, then they're kind of either, shit out of luck, or they have to shell out a couple $100 because that Express Pass is not going to be cheap.
Yeah, so I think that, so one thing we were talking about before we started recording was that, for me, I think there might be a decision made by Universal to say, let's take our big houses that we were going to have this year, like our quote-unquote Stranger Things house, and maybe push them for next year. And the reason I say that they might do that is because if they are going to limit the number of people that can get in, why waste a house or waste a theme on something that you're not going to have the level of guests that you're going to have this year? I don't want to say it's going to happen, but there is a chance or an opportunity that could happen. So if they do something like this, it could be a lot of internal stuff, a lot of their own stories, and then you kind of just, Jack tells you where you got to go.
Yeah, it's
It would make for an interesting event, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a tight balancing act that they're going to have to pull here, because obviously with all the construction that they're still going to do and all that nonsense, all the marketing, it's still going to cost the same amount of money on their end to get the event out. But now they're limited on how much money gets to come in. So, no pun intended, they're going to jack up the prices, I would assume.
Probably going to see a little bit of a hike in the tickets. I don't know if it'll be extreme, but it'll definitely be, like you said, they may have to, I don't know, they may have to do something
hike
like
up
that.
Those prices a little bit. Yeah, just to, especially those Express Passes, because if somebody that is only coming once, then they're going to want to get through every house, and if they don't buy that option, they're there's no way they're going to be able to get through to all the different houses via virtual lines and stuff like that, especially if, so Jack is taking over your night and just kind of telling you where you're going. So that was one of the rumors that was kind of put out. I'm not sure exactly how credible it is. It seems like a pretty big leap of technology. I don't know if they have the capabilities to, create that, instill it, and then have it run in a couple months without any error. So maybe we get something like that, but not to the full extent that they explained. So time will tell on that one. We'll see. A couple of the other rumors that popped out, I guess the Beetlejuice house is supposedly confirmed, or even more confirmed than it had been. So that wasn't really a big shocker there because we had seen that on the maps before twice. It's been talked about a lot. So we discussed Beetlejuice house in the past a couple times. So that doesn't seem like a huge surprise.
Yeah, it's an IP that we kind of assumed would be there to begin with anyways. So
yeah. And then the secret IP. So all that stuff that we discussed last week, we kind of threw a bunch of different potential IPs out there. I guess what is going to be put in there, or rumor has it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is going to be coming back to Horror Nights to fill that secret IP slot.
Yeah, so we were kind of right.
Yeah,
we did mention that Leatherface would be in a house, just not necessarily in his own house.
Yeah, we talked about like a big slasher thing, and for me, it doesn't make too much sense for me. I know he's a big icon, but I don't think he trumps Freddy Krueger, Jason, Michael. That's just a personal opinion.
No, you're right. I don't think he does either. I think for a horror icon, he's less of an icon than Michael Myers. He's less of an icon than Freddy. Now, to play devil's advocate, Michael has been done to death.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah. No, he does.
Like, they've done him a lot. Freddy would be kind of cool to see, but to me, if you're looking for just that mindless slasher, it's not a bad option. I mean, you could make it less about just Leatherface and kind of make it about his family, too.
And I was kind of leaning towards if we saw one of the slashers, we would see all of them. I guess that was just wishful thinking because I get it. You're not going to probably be spending as much money on licensing and stuff like that and building based off the fact that they're not going to be able to get as much capital back. But I figured if we got one, we'd get a handful of them, and it seemed like if they just picked one, Leatherface wasn't high on my list, but I'm not, disappointed with it. I still love that story. That house is going to be really good. They've done the houses in the past that were really, really creepy and cool. So if that is in fact true, I'm excited for that. It's something slightly a little bit different, but it'll work. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm actually kind of excited for that. If that were to happen, I mean, granted, this is coming from someone that, like I said, has only ever been Horror Nights once so far, but
yeah, it's gonna be good. So the other little rumors that kind of revolve around the overall theme, somebody had said that we're gonna kind of evolve from the 80s theme and adopt a potential 90s theme, which I guess makes sense. Horror Nights started in 91, so to encompass the first couple of years of Horror Nights is going to be a reminiscent of when it started. When I was at Universal the other day, they had a lot of merch and a lot of stuff out there with all that old 90s style theme for Universal. They have a bunch of shirts and cooling towels and stuff like that with the rides of History Past with Jaws, King Kong, Earthquake, all that stuff, and I had that old logo they were selling. I actually got one as a neon blue bucket hat. So 90s cool. Is screaming already through their merch. So I guess if that's the direction they're going in, it makes sense because it's already kind of out there for their shops.
I mean, if that's what, I mean, I didn't really have the time or didn't really take much time when we went to look at the shops in depth. But yeah, if there's a bunch of 90s stuff being put out, I mean, it's a good thing to assume that maybe they will theme something around the 90s.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm wearing jorts as we speak, so it's kind of, I'm pretty excited for that as well. One last little thing, the Universal blog has been posting a lot of stories that revolve around Cary, Ohio. They had one for Meets Meat and one for Twisted Tradition, which was taken from the Harvest Scare Zone that we talked about from a couple years ago. It's pretty interesting that they're, all the stuff that they're putting out themselves is revolving around that Cary, Ohio, because that tagline from Legendary Truth House that we potentially were getting originally was Cary, Ohio, and then version 2 came out and they dropped the Cary, Ohio tagline. But it seems like we're definitely going to be getting Cary, Ohio at some point. So is that house going to be a Cary, Ohio house? Are they dropping the Legendary Truth? Is Cary, Ohio going to be kind of an overall theme as well with that whole 90s theme? The 90s theme I feel like is just music and merchandising and stuff like that. Is Cary, Ohio going to be a setting for the majority of these houses and stuff like that. I know that a lot of different icons and stuff can tie in with Cary, Ohio from there. We're talking Cindy Kane and the Caretaker and stuff like that. So it's all kind of encompassed in that Cary, Ohio, which has a lot of tradition. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. This is something that could be interesting as maybe if it's going to be a house or a scare zone. We're kind of left wondering because it hasn't been on any speculation maps besides version 1. And it's coming to us in some way, shape, or form, I'd say, just based off of the fact that they're putting out these diatribes.
My guess that like everything's kind of been fluid since the whole COVID thing started. So I mean, it could be that let's go back. Let's just rethink what we were gonna do, and let's go back and do stuff that we already know. So if maybe they are gonna theme the whole thing around Cary.
Yeah.
You never know. And plus, it would kind of reach back for the 30 years because it's like, hey, we've been doing this, this town in Ohio, and everything's been themed around that to a point. But we've had, houses here and houses there. But now, let's say, maybe we just haven't had the time to really get a lot of these major IPs ready to go for this year. So now we're gonna say, let's just go reach back into our pocket and say, let's bring everything everyone knows and loves from our history and. You never know. It could come out that way too.
I'm all for it because I am a sucker for the IPs that I hold near and dear to my heart. They're really fun to kind of walk through. But from that creative aspect, I love just reading these stories and being introduced to new things, to new stories. They would work great as movies if Universal ever did like a whole actual movie set with a couple of these icons, give them actual horror icon style movies. That would be great. But I love that whole storytelling aspect of the original stories and the fact that they're putting out these long, almost biographies of, certain thing, meets meat. That whole story right there was a cool little, way to kind of bring us into Horror Nights without already bringing us there. So I'm expecting to see that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, what Nick's talking about, I know he mentioned it, but on the blog, Universal's blog, you said their head writer or one of the writers that works for them?
I believe, yeah, I think it's one of the Horror Nights writers.
So they've been writing like full like narratives of some of these characters. So like you can read a whole like right now you can read a whole narrative about Mr. Sam Meats, the guy who owns Meats in Cary, Ohio. It's really cool. He just showed it to me today, so I'm gonna go home and probably read a bunch of it just to kind of get a sense for some of these characters. But I think that it's a cool idea. It might mean nothing. It might just be that they want to just bring us back, and they could just bored and they wanted stuff to do. But it could also be a little bit of a hint. You never know.
Yeah, I believe the guy that writes it, Patrick Braillard, I believe it is. I'm not sure exactly, but he's one of the show directors for their creative team. So he's kind of been diving into the Horror Nights aspect of things. So now to get to what this episode is actually going to be about, besides just kind of shooting out, those random rumors that we've heard, we're still left with no concrete evidence of what's going to happen. We're hoping this week that we'd get some news, but we're still left waiting. I'm hoping that this week or the next coming weeks we get something, being that the parks have been open for a while, but we'll just wait and see. 91 was when this event started. It wasn't Horror Nights then, it was Fright Nights, but they opened up with all the Universal monsters kind of as their icons. So they had Frankenstein's monster, Bride of Frankenstein, Wolfman, the Mummy, Gillman, Count Dracula. Those were kind of the overseers, the icons, so to speak.
Yeah,
they weren't. Sense. Yeah, they weren't the icons that we know. We know our icons as more of a Universal property that they created. They own obviously the Universal monsters, but it's not something that they created for this event. So we're kind of gonna wash those ones away.
We're not gonna spend a ton of time on those. I mean, you guys all kind of know the Universal monsters, especially since you're probably all horror buffs, anyways. But if I had to pick a favorite, my favorite's probably Wolfman.
Yeah, I love the Gill Man. I don't know why, I just do.
Yeah, I mean he's definitely a unique character, and I love going back and watching those old movies.
Yeah.
And like it's clearly a dude in a rubber suit.
Yeah.
But it's so something so simple about it.
Yeah.
That makes it so awesome.
It's what started it for us. All right, so we'll start with, because obviously those were kind of a throwaway for us. We're gonna go to Horror Nights 5, and that's where we got our first actual icon, so to speak. That's the Crypt Keeper. So now, just to backtrack a little bit, we're going to do kind of what we did last week. We're going to go through each one of these, kind of give a little bio. You know most of them at this point, but for the people that haven't, or just for our own sake, just to kind of dive into their story a little bit and get us excited even more, we're going to dive into their bios, maybe what they could be inspired by, what they kind of remind us of, and then we're going to say, not likely, likely or very likely that we're going to see these or any of these at the upcoming event, whether it be in a house, a scare zone, in some capacity. So let's dive into the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah, I mean, the Crypt Keeper, we all kind of know who he is. I mean, he's like, to me, he's like, as if I go back in just my thoughts and things that I remember as a kid growing up, the Crypt Keeper was always like, he was that thing that you never really got to watch much because your parents were super protective and they didn't let you watch things that looked scary. But, you know, when I could sneak some of the stuff and watch it behind their backs, don't tell them I said that. You know, the Crypt Keeper always one of the first things that came up. And that was that really kind of like, for me, it was that stepping stone from, you know, growing up watching Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark to getting into more adult-ish horror. And I know that Crypt Keeper isn't exactly like, it's not the be-all, end-all of, you know, scary horror, but the idea of having different stories and having an amalgamation, like Creepshow, that type of thing, you know, for me, he kind of reminds me of that type of horror back in the 90s. And that, to me, that's kind of just like one of the things I remember. I mean, I know that, I don't know exactly his entire history. I know that I think he may have started in comics. I think there was a comic run with the Crypt Keeper. I don't know I don't know his whole history. Sure. I don't know his whole origin. Yeah, so if you actually look it up, you can actually see it. He was a host of what EC Comics once had. They're old horror stories from EC Comics. And funny story is that, you know, if you go back and listen to some of Stephen King's interviews, Stephen King says all the time that he was greatly influenced by a lot of EC Comics and a lot of those early Tales from the Crypt type stuff.
Yep.
Obviously, he predates the Tales from the Crypt a little bit, but EC Comics have been around forever. But yeah, they had an HBO show called Tales from the Crypt, and that's what I remember seeing. And obviously, we didn't have HBO back in the day. You had to like actually physically like have the channel, like you had to actually have the channel like activated. You can't just say, let me download the HBO app and watch Tales from the Crypt.
It's not that easy.
Not like that. It wasn't like that back then. But my dad had a black box, which essentially is a box for those that are really young. It was a box.
The FBI is going to come and track us down.
Don't say anything.
They're going to find my Napster account.
But the box essentially would give you access to all the channels, and HBO was one of them. And I remember seeing it a few times back then. But either way, I don't know his entire history, but he was kind of like he's the one icon from that era that kind of sticks in your mind. I know there was a Vault Keeper and an Old Witch too, but the Crypt Keeper is kind of like,
yeah, he stands out.
I don't know.
Yeah, so when he was the icon at 5, they kind of gave him, again, something that we talked about previously, the Dungeon of Terror that was found on that version 2 speculation map. They kind of gave that to him, and they just renamed it as Crypt Keeper's Dungeon of Terror. So he kind of got to put his spin on the first house that started it all. But after that, he's appeared a couple times since. He's been back. He was in 2010, and then he was at the Horror Nights 25. So it seems like every big milestone event, he kind of resurfaces. So it makes sense that we would see him at some point, I would assume. I know Hollywood has had a Creepshow house, and that's something that has also been speculated for Orlando for a couple different times throughout this whole waiting process to see what's going to happen. Do I think we're going to get a Creepshow house at this point? I would say that that's likely as well, just based off of the fact that, you know, Hollywood had the Universal Monsters, and then Orlando got it. So it seems like Hollywood is kind of like a sample, like a testing sample, so to speak. And being that I'm going to run with those rumors again, just because if we do the whole 90s theme, Crypt Keeper makes sense. It fills that nostalgic void. You don't want like an updated version of. I want them to look like really crappy, like Tronic. I want to see like a really bad.
I'm sure they could pull something off from the you know, annals of their history. I'm sure they've got an old working animatronic or something they could pull up.
I don't want like a new version. I want the crappy one that like the head creaks slowly and just that's all I want. I don't want it to be up to speed on things.
Yeah, if they were to bring him back, I'd be kind of cool. I'd give him a house.
Yeah, at some point I would say for Crypt Keeper, just based on the fact that, you know, he was the first essential icon, the fact that he's been back at 20 and 25, I think it's very likely that we see Crypt Keeper at some point.
I think it's almost a guarantee we'll see him in some way.
Even if it's just like a nod.
Right.
If he might not have, even if he doesn't have a scare zone or a house, I'm sure he'll play some part.
You never know. And like you said, as of right now, the speculation map did have a horror. So.
Dungeon of Terror.
Dungeon of Terror, excuse me. So.
So maybe we
if
see
that
him
actually does happen,
aspect.
he might be in that house.
Mm-hmm. So after the Crypt Keeper in 95, we don't get an icon until 99, which was Imhotep the Mummy.
From the movie The Mummy.
From the movie. So we're not going to spend time on that as much because it's just,
No, because if you haven't seen the Brendan Fraser Mummy, don't listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Please listen to our podcast. But go watch the movie because...
Especially Brendan Fraser.
Right.
You're out there.
You're Brendan Fraser?
I know you're not doing shit.
Mummy 4, Brendan Fraser, please.
But... yeah, that coincided with the movie. I think The Mummy came out in 99.
It did.
Yeah, Horror Nights was 99 when he was there, so it was just kind of a promotional
Right. And remember,
shtick.
I mean, The Mummy is a Universal property, so it made sense that they were like, let's just bank on the fact that we had a movie come out.
Yep.
I mean, they only built a ride, 5 years later?
Yeah. Here is when we start to get into the interesting characters, so to speak. At Horror Nights 10, I believe it was, 2000, that's when we first got introduced to what we view as those icons. Our first icon, essentially, was Jack the Clown. So they have a long, long history of Jack the Clown. You can kind of look it up if you'd like to hear more. But we're just going to kind of dive in quickly and try and sum up this character. So if you have no idea who he is or what he looks like, I don't know why you'd be listening, because you obviously do. But benefit of the doubt, if you haven't seen him, obviously he's just this weird little jaded up clown. He's got the white face, the big long curly orange hair, those awesome yellow teeth.
He's a clown.
Yeah, he's a clown.
Clowns are terrifying.
And that's kind of where he was based off of. He was kind of taken out of that whole fear of clowns and drove into.
Yeah, he's not a clown from outer space like we saw last year.
No, definitely not. So he's got a long, long story. I'm going to try and sum it up as best I can, and forgive me if I mess parts up, but essentially he was born in a rest home or something like that and fell into a circus. So with Jack, he's had a couple different stints with various circuses, insane asylums, all that stuff. And they kind of intertwine him into Horror Nights over the past couple of years, whether he is there to kind of take over the event, because he has, his character is that he has a very large ego. He doesn't like to be upstaged. So he kind of tries to take it over at some point. He has appeared a handful of times throughout the years. Actually, I think he's one of the most used ones. If I went down the list, there's got to be at least 10 or 15 times where Jack kind of pops up at our events, either to host them, either has a scare zone or some sort of maze in that aspect. He resembles a lot to me, Joker from Batman. He has kind of that, Jack and Harley Quinn relationship with Chance, I believe it was. So they kind of have a history themselves, but it kind of gives me that reminiscent feeling of the old Batman Joker.
He's kind of like that whole idea of that. Obviously, if you go into the backstory of like the Joker from DC, I mean, he's kind of like, there really isn't there's a backstory, but there really isn't a backstory. You really don't know what the backstory is, other than the fact that he's just a psychotic clown who wants to see everybody burn or murder as many people as he can. So again, I'm one of those that I didn't really know much about Jack until I started reading up about him for this podcast specifically, and he kind of is like Universal's first real Horror Nights icon, obviously, but
one of their creations, really.
Yeah, I mean, he's like their first real creation, I guess, is the best way I can put it. I don't want to say he's like he started in Orlando, right? Like this is like this isn't one that started with Hollywood. This is like an Orlando original.
This is an Orlando, and it's interesting. I would suggest going to read up on him, because his story goes
there's
pretty long.
So much for him that, like, I mean, his Wikipedia page is ginormous.
Yeah. It's just all about him starting the circus, joining a circus, finding this guy, I think it's Dr. Oddfellow or something like that. He used to run the circus. Jack ends up finding him, killing him, taking over the circus, and kind of wearing this crown or cane or something like that that grants you everlife. And then at that point, they kind of intertwine his story into Horror Nights and how he comes about to actual Horror Nights. It's interesting how they do these with these characters.
He's shown up. Obviously, 2000 was the first time we saw him in Horror Nights 10. He was back again for the next one in Horror Nights 11, and then we saw him again come back 2006 for 16.
Yeah.
He was back again for 17.
Yeah, he floats around.
So he definitely, they bring him back quite a bit, or they brought him back quite a bit.
Yeah, this is I'm just going to go out and say that this is somebody that we're going to see again this year.
Chances are, yeah, you're gonna. I mean, my guess is that because it's the 30th, you're gonna see a bunch of these icons.
Yeah.
And obviously, Jack the Clown will be the leader.
Yeah.
The leader of the icons.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier on the whole app thing where Jack takes over your night. If that's been rumored already, that's not going to be something that's just based off of nothing. We're going to see Jack at some point. So jumping to the next year, we were supposed to get another icon, a new icon, Eddie Schmidt, which was actually Jack's brother. So in the story through Jack and Eddie, they were the story
Supposed to be the brother, right?
Yeah, so he was the brother of Jack. They were born in the same place in the late. It was like the 1800s when they were born, and Eddie kind of was obsessed with 80s slasher films and always like the chainsaw wielding guys and stuff like that. And then I believe I think he died in like a fire or something like that, and then from there the story drags on through their history.
Right. The point is, this actually, like Nick said, he was scrapped, and the idea was, like, or at least from what the stories are, is that because 2001 we unfortunately had to endure the 9/11 terror attacks, and because of that they actually pulled him and replaced him with Jack himself. So Jack wasn't actually supposed to be at that year. It was supposed to replace with his brother, Eddie, but because of whether they just felt it was too insensitive to have a character like Eddie that year because of, what we'd already gone through, they just brought Jack back, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was something that we already knew.
Yeah, I was a kid during obviously I was just going into high school in 2001, so I remember vividly that year everything just changed for a lot of people. So to have anything that was uber violent, it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
I mean, they even changed Spider-Man for that movie.
Right, exactly.
After being replaced, we did obviously get Eddie sprinkled around a little bit, not as much as everybody else. He's been at various events, whether it be in a scare zone or a house, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Being that Eddie's, not really one of those big top tier guys, I think, for the icons, I'm going to say it's not likely that we get Eddie here this year. It seems like there's more story to tell on him. I could see him coming back as like a full-fledged icon at some point, getting his actual due. But for an anniversary year, getting somebody that was just kind of sprinkled in, I don't see it happening necessarily.
Right. Well, if we go by the rumor that you started with about there might be a Texas Chainsaw House, I mean, you've already got that point. At that point, you've already got a chainsaw wielding maniac. Yeah. I mean, there's really no reason to have two of them basically the same character.
Yeah, so it would just kind of get lost in translation. He's a great character. It's a good story that they're both kind of connected to. So it would be cool to see that story drawn out a little bit more a different year, where you can actually get the full aspect.
Who knows? Maybe down the road we'll have a house that kind of goes into how Jack and Eddie are related.
Yeah,
you'll have a whole house just themed around Jack the Clown and Eddie and their upbringing or whatever. But you never know.
Yeah. So going in order still, we're going to hit 2002, and this was when it was the Islands of Fear. So this is where we kind of first get introduced to the Caretaker. So Caretaker, he's just this creepy old school kind of surgeon-y, it's back in that time when you had doctors that visited houses. He would do like house visits and stuff like that.
His actual name is Dr. Albert Kane.
Yeah, so
they call him the Caretaker.
Yeah, he was a surgeon of some sort. It was in that Victorian style era when everything was just creepy.
He made house calls.
Yeah, exactly. It was just creepy on the outside looking in. Essentially, he always just wanted to understand more how you die and what happens when you die and stuff like that. So he started to work on kind of freshly dead people.
Yeah, to me, he's kind of like a cross between Jack the Ripper and like a Jekyll Hyde type character. Yeah. So like, maybe actually more along the lines of a Jekyll and Hyde type character where like, you had that doctor, but he secretly wants to, bring bodies and do weird experiments and stuff like that on them.
Yeah, I feel like this character is like the basis of every Ghost Hunters show that I see. They bust into some old house and they're like, oh, this old doctor used to work here, but wait, he used to kill people. Dun dun.
Yeah,
dun.
and I think he owned a funeral home, Kane Funeral Home.
So that way he kind of always had.
So he always had fresh body
parts to work with and stuff like that.
It's definitely a story that I don't want to call it cliche, but it is cliche. Yeah. I mean, it's like there's how many stories have we seen or heard or watched or read that it's all about like that creepy doctor that experimented on dead bodies,
Jack the Ripper style, like Sweeney Todd almost.
Right.
So it's been done before, but it's still kind of a cool story. He is one of the top tier icons, I would say. I would, if we're gonna get a 30th anniversary house, which has been speculated, then I can see him for sure being in there. If there was no news on that, I would say all the stuff about Cary, Ohio. I think that would kind of lead us towards seeing the caretaker as well this year. I mean, honestly, going down this list, there's not going to be a lot of icons that we don't see because it's just so easy for them. They have the costumes, they have everything already lined up. This is nothing new for them. They roll them out every year. So honestly, we're going to get a lot of these, which I'm excited about because just talking about all these stories, it kind of gets you just a little bit more excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get to him eventually, but like when the fear icon was introduced, from what I've read and what I'm reading, is that he chose the caretaker as like one of his minions.
Yeah.
Death. So if they were to bring him back, I think that what we might see is that like not only is it going to be just like a celebration of their past, but where have these icons gotten to, or what have they come to? So like, the last time we may have seen him was he was made a minion of fear. He was death. He is death, of the amalgamation of death. So
No.
how do we go from where do we go from there? And that's where I think if they bring it back, we'll see it. Like, what has he become since then?
Yeah, and another character that kind of ties in with the caretaker is Cindy Kane. So we haven't really got to dive into her story a lot. She's kind of got scrapped a little bit and put on the back burner. She's the daughter of the caretaker. So she has appeared at a couple houses. I think she was in a
scare zone.
Yeah, she was a scare zone. She was in a house, I believe, at 13. But other than that, we haven't really got...
Yeah, I think you're right. It was Summer Scream House Revisited.
Yeah.
Is the house she was in.
Yeah, so her story hasn't really been told. Kind of like how Eddie was scrapped. It just kind of got put on the back burner for whatever reason. I think during that year, just from talking to people around, I think that was the year there was a lot of like child abductions happening, whether it be just in Florida or throughout the nation. So with that in the news, they were kind of like, maybe we shouldn't do a little girl icon.
Yeah, children they're a tough sell when it comes to horror. It's not easy selling people on the idea of a scary child or an abducted child or children that are put in harm's way, that sort of thing.
Iffy subject at best.
It's hard to make it work, but they probably will. I could see them bringing her back as more of like a young adult at this point, because it's been so many years since the last time you've heard of her. So she could have grown up at this point.
Yeah.
And funny enough, you bring up how she's been scrapped like Eddie was. She also has been seen with chainsaws. So
yeah.
I don't know, something about chainsaws.
Yeah, the Horror Nights, man, they love those chainsaws. Just a good, quick
scare. As long as they're not like last year's. I'm sorry, and a hot take, but last year's chainsaw guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, I don't understand. I didn't understand. I get it. That is the 80s. The whole Tron chainsaw, Tron saws.
Yeah.
I don't know. The lights and the flash. It didn't scare me. It was just
Yeah, so for me.
I don't know.
Yeah, all right, let's go off topic a little bit. just quickly. So the Arcade, the intro with like the neon style stuff. Again, it wasn't scary for me, but the visuals of it, man, like there was nothing.
It was
when I walked
cool.
in, I knew it was at Horror Nights. I liked that. The chainsaw stuff that I hate, which I understand, was over by The Simpsons. It's just people in like SWAT suits with chainsaws,
light up
just
chainsaws,
walking around.
Right.
I from my understanding is that with The Simpsons rights, that they don't want anything too scary, too gory around that area.
I get it. Because actually, I read a story last week that this is just on the same lines, that the reason they don't do it in Islands of Adventure anymore is Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, she doesn't want the Halloween stuff
be near that
in it or near it. And unfortunately, Islands of Adventure is taken up pretty much by Harry Potter. So
yeah, they have that whole
they would be restricted by space.
Yeah, I mean, whereas the Harry Potter on Universal side is tucked
away.
away.
In the back.
It doesn't have to really be meshed with it.
I'm just saying, JK, if you're listening, what would be sick is if you allowed like some Halloween-esque Harry Potter stuff going on in Diagon Alley. Like floating pumpkins and candles and like Dementors and stuff. I'm just saying, it would be kind of cool.
Yeah. So apparently, on our podcast, we have Brendan Fraser and J.K. Rowling.
I am a Harry Potter fan, so if she's listening, which I know she's not. But...
So all right. We went off topic, but we're gonna reel it back in. So, Halloween Horror Nights 13, 2003. That's when we got introduced to our next essential new icon, which is the director. And obviously being a film nerd, being a film major, this is kind of one of my guys that I really, really like. So I hope we get him back. He pairs well with another guy we're going to talk about later with the Usher. But essentially the director, he's gone by a couple different names. I think they've changed it over the past years, but his name was like Paolo Ravinsky. But they've toyed with
he
his
started
name
as
a little
he
bit.
said he was actually the first icon for Singapore.
Yeah. So they've toyed with his name. Essentially, he's just kind of a a film buff. He does a lot of little snuff films, and he just films pretty much murdering people. That's really the basis of it. I guess supposedly in 2010, like you were talking about how Fear kind of embodied Caretaker.
Yeah.
Fear embodies, it's like a summoning demon or whatever, but he embodied the director as sacrifice because of he would sacrifice anything for the name of art. Those people like the NYC film people that are artistes are not my typical favorite, but the act of having an icon as an actual movie director kind of actually stuck with me. So that's kind of why I find myself gravitating towards him as one of my favorite icons. So for the director, because he kind of stands alone, much like Caretaker and Jack, he's not really reliant on somebody else. I would say that it's likely that we see him again, whether it be, like I said, 30th anniversary house, whether it be as an overall icon. I see it happening this year.
I could also maybe see him as having his own scare zone too, kind of like last year we had the runway, the fashion show, Vanity Ball type thing. You could see something like that where you have like a film set mock-up,
like auditions, or that'd be cool
on a stage or something.
That'd be cool. I would be interested, honestly, if these icons don't get houses. I would be all for having each one have their own themed scare zone. You can just kind of play off of that end and just give them their due there. And honestly, the scare zones are, I don't want to say more fun than the houses, but if we go and it's a night and all the lines are crazy, I can still enjoy myself just walking through scare zones, just smelling the fog and just seeing different stuff. So I could very much enjoy myself just kind of walking through all those scare zones.
Yeah, the scare zones help really kind of like transform the park from a theme park to a Halloween horror-esque like attraction. It really does kind of change the theme of the park. And to be honest, like, for obviously living in Central Florida, everything's dominated by Disney here, but no one does Halloween like Universal. Like,
no,
Disney has their stuff, but it's not anywhere near.
It's for the kids, and we understand it, and it's fun every now and then to kind of see it all themed up, but Horror Nights is for us. So we're gonna keep going in order. In 2004, there was kind of like a big debate if there was even an actual icon. They kind of list him as an insane asylum patient. So we're going to just skip past that at point because he was pretty much just a promotional deal. He was just on posters. So for all intents and purposes, 2004 did not have an icon in our eyes. Jump to 2005, Tales of Terror. That's when we get introduced to two new icons. We have the Storyteller and we have the Terror Queen. So the Terror Queen, we kind of did a pretty good history about when we talked about that speculation map. So we're not going to go super in-depth on her just because we've already done that, and it seems based off of those maps that she's going to have her own house. Now, I'm not exactly sure why out of all the icons that she gets her own house and the other ones don't, but I mean, either way, I'm for it because I'm excited regardless. But it was just an interesting pick on their end.
Yeah, my guess would be it's just because they don't really have much of a background fleshed out for her. So it's kind of like an opportunity for them to really kind of go wild and do something new.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like like the way you're talking, like with like Jack the Clown and the Caretaker and the director and all these different, characters, they have pretty fleshed out backgrounds. So there's only so much they're going to be able to change with that without making all of their fans like resent them. So having a character that they've introduced in the past but not really have much of a background probably gives them a little bit more room to work with. So just coming from someone that doesn't really have a bunch of history with all these different icons, I didn't get to see a lot of these guys in action because I just haven't been at the opportunity to come to it. I think it's kind of cool that they'll have a brand new character to kind of work with.
The Storyteller one is actually pretty interesting because she ties a lot into houses and various Horror Nights stories, but essentially she's just like this really old, decrepit lady. She just reads from her book and tells stories. She is also another one of the minions of Fear, as quote unquote legend.
She wrote the Terra Quintus, looks like.
Yeah, so she kind of ties in here and there. She ties into she had an appearance in the legendary Truth House, the Wyandotte estate. Again, something we talked about previously on one of the past episodes. So she was in there.
Yep.
She also got to kind of retell the Dungeon of Terror at one point. They kind of had one where it was retold, and she opened up the terror as like a tourist attraction, invited guests to kind of be a part of her story. So it'd be interesting to see how they incorporate her this year. Again, I think she's one of those very standalone style icons that is going to get a nod in some way, shape, or form.
She looks like a scary grandmother.
Yeah, she's terrifying. Yeah, I would not want to eat her Werthers.
It looks like, honestly, they have like a bunch of dudes playing her.
Yeah.
The makeup's really good, though. I'm looking at pictures for those. Obviously, you can't see what I'm doing, but
yeah. So going down that list, 2005 was Storyteller and Terror Queen. I think we're gonna get both of those just based off of what's been speculated. Terror Queen has her house speculated, and the Storyteller is a part of two houses.
I mean, the fact that if the Storyteller is the one that wrote the Terror Queen story, the Terror Quintus, then if we're gonna have a Terror Quintus house, then my guess is that she will be a part of it in some way.
Yeah. So going down the list now, we're at Horror Nights, the Sweet 16, 2006. No new icons there. So we're going through a couple of years now where we just kind of get either icons that we've already had in the past, or we have some famous people from slashers. We have Freddy Krueger, Jason, Leatherface, stuff like that. We had all those kind of fill in some way, shape, or form. And then in, I believe it was, going down the list, where were we? 2006, 7, 8, So 2008, that's when we got the Bloody Mary icon, so to speak. Everyone kind of knows that whole story of...
This one's like, it's less of a Universal creation. I mean, it is obviously their own take on it, but Bloody Mary is a legend that if you don't know what the Bloody Mary legend is, there's a ton of stuff you can read about it or watch about it. I mean, go watch Candyman, because Candyman is really a play on the Bloody Mary story. The idea that if someone stands in front of a mirror and says Bloody Mary, three or five times, she'll appear and kill you and rip you into like her dimension or whatever. But it's a legend that's been around for many, many years. Obviously one that babysitters have used to terrify the children they've watched for years on end. But obviously Universal had their own take on her and used her as an icon that year. Yeah, and it's weird. There's some weird licensing issue with Bloody Mary. I'm not sure who owns like an urban legend story, but there was something going on with Universal and whoever owned the licensing that I don't think really allowed it after that point. So just based on that fact, we're not going to see Bloody Mary at this event, I don't think. If this is going to be a strong icon year or a 30th anniversary, Bloody Mary doesn't stick out as one of those prominent figures. No, I mean she's obviously a well-known character and a legend, but that's why I think that going back to what we talked about a couple episodes ago when we discussed the Candyman house or possibility of a Candyman house. I think it was last episode actually. Yeah. Candyman could kind of play that role of Bloody Mary. He's not Bloody Mary, but if you've ever watched the movie, which I would suggest, go back and watch it. I actually just went back and watched it again this past week. It's on Netflix, and you forget how good of a horror movie it is, and how it really took at the time a lot of what we considered horror tropes and turned them on their heads, and it really takes this Bloody Mary story in a different direction. And it also had a lot to say about the time, the current events at the time and everything else, and actually still really really relatable to today. But that's kind of where I think that if they're going to bring her back, they're going to bring her back as in the guise of more of a Candyman house or zone or something. Yeah. So the next icon we're going to go through is the usher, who I kind of mentioned earlier with the director. Now, these two don't go hand in hand all the time, but for me, you have the director of the movie, you have the usher from the movie theater. It makes perfect sense to introduce them together. Again, just being like a movie-style buff, fan, whatever. Again, he kind of fell into my interest, I'd say. Yeah, he's kind of like that creepy early 1900s, obviously he's called the usher. He's a movie usher, theater usher. At the time, again, like most of our listeners probably don't know what an usher really is or did. No. But in theater, Even today in theater, ushers are the people that like help you get to your seat,
Yeah.
or they help you find where you got to go when you're in the theater. Obviously, with movies today, you don't really have that anymore. But
No.
he has that kind of look. I mean, if you want to think of it along the Disney realm, he kind of looks like the cast members that work in Tower of Terror.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They kind of give you that vibe.
That's exactly how I was thinking. But essentially, his backstory is he's from the 1920s. He works at a movie theater and he hates like rude people. It's the customer service.
I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody that's ever worked in retail or in customer service in some way can relate to him.
I wish I could be the usher at times. Oh, you don't like that drink? I'm going to destroy you with sandbags. Essentially is what he did. So one of the stories, I guess, was that there was a rude customer. He grabbed his flashlight, threw it through the screen. There was a scuffle, and he ends up pulling. Back in theater aspect, they have big sandbags that hang on top to kind of play as a counterweight.
Yep.
And he kind of released one of those and crushed the dude. So that's always kind of been on my mind.
Which is actually, I mean, not to sidetrack you, but what's interesting about that whole idea is that he was watching the re-release of one of his favorite films of all time, The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney Sr.
Yeah.
They actually got the inspiration for Jack the Clown from a Lon Chaney quote, who said something about like the scariest thing is a clown by moonlight or something along those lines. But like it's a nice little tie-in there from the original icon.
Yeah, so you can tell the guys that kind of create these characters definitely pull from a lot of the same source material.
Yeah, they're fans. I mean, you can definitely tell they're fans.
Yeah. So he's also one of those minions of fear. He kind of embodies vengeance, which, again, makes sense because he is very vengeful towards people that break the rules, that are rude, just people that kind of deserve to get punched in the face every now and then.
Like I said, he's the subconscious of every single person that's ever worked with in retail or service.
If you have to deal with the general public, this is kind of your guy. Going back now through the years, we were in 2008, 2009. So in 2010, we kind of get introduced finally to Fear, that embodiment of fear, where he had those little minions, so to speak.
This was 10 years ago too, so 2010.
So we're kind of creeping our way towards the present.
If you're seeing a pattern though, 2010. So the reason I'm saying that is like obviously 2000 was our first icon, Jack. 2010 was Fear, who kind of brought all of the icons together in a way, and now we're going into 30 years. So there's a chance we could see a new icon. Yeah,
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we did get a new icon. I'd be all for it just because I love having all these like little options. So essentially, Fear is just kind of this embodiment, like we talked about. He kind of heralded these different people to come with him, and he just kind of oversaw them. So we had Jack the Clown. He kind of represented chaos. Caretaker was for death. The director was sacrifice. The storyteller was legend, and the usher was vengeance. So Fear kind of was just that overall lurking figure that brought all of these little minions, creatures, all these icons together and just released them on us at that event. Now, do I think we're going to get Fear back for the 30th? I don't think so. So with Fear not really being one of those super well-established icons, I would say that it's not likely that we're going to see him this year. He brings all these like little minions and all the other icons to us, but I just don't see it happening that he appears.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were just talking before this whole thing really started, was that, what is the theme going to be? I mean, it could be like last year you have like an overarching 80s theme, you have an overarching 90s theme this year or something along those lines. But like I said too, that I think there's a chance that we could see the icons kind of be that theme and not just be that, we have a few houses or a house here or there or a scare zone that just encompasses the icons. It could just be that because it's the 30th that they do an overall theming of the whole event regarding just, the icons themselves. And if that was the case, I mean, I don't necessarily see them not using Fear. I mean, Fear's kind of become that amalgamation where he said, all right, you're all my minions. He could kind of be that overarching theme. You may not see him directly in any way, but they could find some way of tying it in.
He could be just like as a part of the story. You might not see him, but
like you said before, the advertising.
Yeah, it might be, Fear has brought us here. Or something,
right, exactly.
Like he's released, 30 years of Fear, and he's been behind it this whole time. I could see that kind of happening, but other than that, I don't think they're going to kind of dive into fear much more than that. So then the next year, we get to Horror Nights 21, Lucky 21, Blackjack. So in 2011, we are introduced to Lady Luck. So it's been a while since we kind of got, a full new icon. Again, we were introduced to Fear the previous year, but his story kind of intertwined with a lot of the other ones. Whereas Lady Luck here is kind of a new style of icon. She's actually like a pretty attractive woman. It's just...
She's a succubus.
Yeah, it's different than, no one's going to be attracted to the storyteller.
Right. I mean, if we're not going to go into it, but I'm sure everyone that's listening knows what a succubus does and is.
Yeah, they slowly lure you in with their looks and kind of take what they want and get from there.
Yeah. At least the male population knows what a succubus is.
So she's appeared starting in 21. She appeared a couple more times, I believe, after that. But she was never a super, super prominent. Her story isn't as, her backstory isn't as in-depth as all the other ones just because she hasn't been around as long. So I don't think that we're going to see Lady Luck actually in any sort of prominent capacity.
I mean, she is related to the Shady Brook Rest Home and Sanitarium where Jack was born.
Yeah.
So they do kind of tie her in that way. From what I've read, that a year after the Shady Brook Rest Home closed, a prisoner named Floyd Mercer hung himself, and he left behind a notebook full of quotes about just luck and luck itself, I have luck, you have luck, bad luck, good luck, that type of stuff. It turns out he was the only known person to ever gamble with Lady Luck herself and survive. So I like the idea that they're taking the traditional story of a succubus and rather doing what they normally do, they've kind of turned it into the idea of playing your luck, and whether that's gambling or gambling with your life and that sort of thing, and whether you lose or win, you're winning against the demon Lady Luck.
Yeah,
which I think to me is kind of cool.
So her story is definitely interesting. It's just a matter of diving in a little bit more. It kind of falls into that Eddie, that Cindy Kane kind of thing for me, whereas she just might not be as...
If she's a one-off, I don't think you'll see her much for this year.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd have to probably, not saying they couldn't do it, but you're going... I mean, if you're doing your 30th anniversary, taking an off-year icon...
Yeah, you need your heavy hitters.
You need your heavy hitters, yeah, exactly.
So, following Lady Luck, we kind of took a little break from icons. We had 2012, 2013, 2014 with no icons, and then 2015 we're brought back to Jack. Now, finally, in 26, this was 2016, I believe it was, we finally got another new one. So we got introduced to Chance, who, when we were talking about Jack, kind of referenced that Joker-Harley Quinn relationship. You can tell just by looking at her, she's very
much the Harley Quinn to Jack the Clown's Joker.
Very Harley Quinn inspired. She's got, the pigtails, the makeup, that burlesque style outfit. She's very fitting, and when you see her, it's very reminiscent to that Harley Quinn style character. So being that she's only been around for a couple of years at this point, she hasn't really appeared too much past that. I love the character, and I think because of just how much she's tied to Jack, and overall just how popular I think she was, I think that if we see Jack, we're going to see Chance. I know that this is kind of straying from the path of the point that we kind of made with Eddie and Cindy and all them, where, if they're not around that much, we don't really need to bring them in on the 30th. But I think because of how well she ties in with Jack's story and his whole carnival style theme, I think if we see one, we're going to see the other one in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that Jack and her play host to this year's event. So you'll see them in a scare zone when you first get in there, or they might have their own house if they do an icon house. But I think these two will kind of be the host for this year.
Yeah, they definitely coincide with one another, and I could see them either on a stage or, if we're talking that entrance over by Rip Ride Rocket, I could see them filming a lot of vignettes with the two of them kind of advertising and talking about the event and stuff like that. So that kind of ran us all the way through all of the icons, so to speak. I know we kind of bounced around a little bit here and there, but we just wanted to kind of touch a little bit on each of them, not too crazy.
One thing to keep in mind, we're talking specifically from like an Orlando perspective.
Yeah.
Now, there may have been icons at Hollywood or in Singapore or other, the other locations, but from our point of view, is specifically from Orlando.
Yeah.
Like I said, there could very well be icons that we didn't cover that started in Hollywood and have only been really in Hollywood or just in Singapore or whatever that we might see in Orlando.
Yeah,
as like a new icon here. You never know. I know that with like in 2011, Ghostface was in Hollywood, but it wasn't here in Orlando. Ghostface being the killer from Scream.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Just going through those, I mean, I think there is a handful of them that we're going to be seeing again this year. Just to kind of run down the list quickly, I think we see Crypt Keeper. I would say 100% we're going to see Jack the Clown, and because we're going to see Jack, I think we're going to see Chance. I think that they just go
Those
hand in hand.
probably will be from my point of view, the Crypt Keeper is almost a definite if they stick with Dungeons of Terror house.
Yep.
I think he'll be related to that in some way, probably. As far as the icons are concerned, Jack and Chance for sure, and I think you're going to see the director, the usher, and
the caretaker.
Yeah. Now, again, like we had said before, going through the speculation maps with the Terra Crentis house being a potential house, then you're probably going to see the storyteller and the Terror Queen too. But
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested because I've never seen any of them up and close and personal. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful here that I haven't seen as well, just from kind of missing some of the previous anniversary years and their incarceration years. That I would love to get these together. So, are we going to see them in a scare zone? Are we going to see them in a house? I guess the rumor is that there is a 30th anniversary house that's going to be over by the Men in Black tent, which was the House of 1,000 Corpses last year. So I wouldn't go and say that that's like a marquee location per se.
No, it's kind of hidden in the back.
Yeah, but the way that they did House of 1,000 Corpses last year, the room there's a lot of space for them to work with. It's a lot bigger once you get in. It seems like smaller rooms, but a lot.
Yeah, and
more
the thing
rooms.
is, like your big draw doesn't necessarily have to be in the front of the park. I mean, they'll probably stick Beetlejuice where Ghostbusters was, like you said, I think last week. But that doesn't mean they can't have a big like icon scare zone right in front of Men in Black in that little corner of the park, and then have the house be behind it.
Yeah, so I'm really interested. I know with the speculation maps they kind of placed houses in certain areas, and I haven't really looked too in depth as to which houses are where and whatnot. Typically, that your big draw is right up front by Rip Ride Rockets. That way, that just gives you the most space to form those queue lines, which we might not even see this year.
I think, at least just from my experience last year, and I'm sure it's happened in the past, is I think they do their original stories a disservice by sticking them in some like back house in the back lot, like they did with the underwater one last year, Depths of Fear, where I feel like it was a really interesting house
and Nightingales.
with Nightingales with interesting characters, and it's buried in the back, and not as many people go through it. I mean, we went on opening night and we walked into Depths of Fear.
Yeah, 10-minute wait.
But the Stranger Things one had a 3-hour wait or 2-hour wait.
It was ridiculous. I mean, I get it. That's what those IPs do. They kind of draw the crowd.
That's what they're for.
Which is good that the actual general Halloween Horror Night fans kind of really go towards or gravitate towards their originals, because there's less people like us that care to wait. I'd rather wait the 20 minutes or so for something like.
And that's taking into account that we obviously have the ability to go more than once.
Frequently.
I mean, if obviously we can only go 1 or 2 a night, then obviously you're gonna do the big ones because you want to see those IPs. But
I think that just about wraps it up for this week's episode. We just kind of hit on those icons a little bit, and hopefully the next time you hear us, we're gonna actually have some Horror Nights news,
actual stuff.
Yeah,
that gets dropped.
Fingers crossed, because from what I'm guessing is at this point, because they haven't kind of said anything yet, I'm thinking they're just going to release it all at once.
Probably.
So when that does, what I'd like to do is, like, if it's a video or something like that, I'm going to try to hold off on watching it so that we can record
and we can react
initial
to it,
reactions. So we're going to try and plan that out. So as soon as the news drops, instead of dropping an episode on a Friday, if they put this news out on a Wednesday, we're going to get it out as fast as we can, just so we can kind of get initial reactions, because I know I can't keep my hand out the cookie jar. I can't wait 3 days knowing that something's out there.
It's hard not to not want to see it.
Yeah. But in an ideal world, what I'm going to try and do is initial reactions on this podcast, and we'll drop that on whatever day we get to it.
So before we sign off, anything in horror in general you've watched or read that you want to recommend?
Nothing too crazy. I just got The Lighthouse on DVD. I got Invisible Man on online. I think like a VOD style thing. So I've just been kind of rewatching some of those that I saw in theaters kind of before theaters shut down and trying to work my way back up to it. Also, for those that are local, well, not that it really matters now because when we put this out, it's going to be past
it actually won't matter.
But there's a really cool movie theater up in Maitland, I think it's called the Enzian Theater. They're doing all Alfred Hitchcock movies next week, so I got tickets.
But it's actually a good place to know because like Nick actually brought me last year. They do a bunch of like old Halloween horror movies during the month of October.
Yep.
They do a bunch of old classics. So if you're in the Central Florida area, definitely a place to check out.
The Enzian Theater, a lot of really cool stuff. But yeah, I'm going to go see The Birds. I'm going to go see Psycho, but they're also playing like Vertigo and Rear View and stuff like that. And like I said, last year when we went to go see Chopping Mall and we saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
If you haven't seen,
see Chopping Mall.
Please go watch Chopping Mall.
Yeah, it's amazing. That should be a house.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit older, but I did just happen to watch these two movies that were released on Netflix. I don't know if they were released anywhere else, but they star Mark Duplass. And if you've watched the show The League about fantasy football, Mark Duplass is a pretty funny comedic actor. Well, he plays this crazed psycho, essentially, is what he is, in these two movies called Creep and Creep 2. Now, they seem stupid. They are found footage. I know how everyone feels about found footage movies. But if you take the chance to watch both of them, I think they're both still on Netflix. They are deeply unsettling. Deeply unsettling movies. And like I said before, I'm not someone that scares easily. I've been so desensitized to horror movies that like traditional gore and all that stuff doesn't really scare me. I just kind of watch it for the nostalgia factor of just watching horror movies. I need something that deeply unsettles me, and Mark Duplass plays a deeply unsettling character. So Creep 2, go check them out. Other than that, the VHS movies, if you haven't watched them, again, found footage movies, but they're good representations of found footage. So I definitely think you should go check those out if you haven't already.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening along this week for the Fear and Beer podcast. We will see you next Friday, hopefully, like we said, with some more news. But until then, this is Nick.
And this is Shamus.
Happy haunts, everyone. And again, I would just like to thank Vampire Stepdad for letting us use his music for our intro and outro music. So if you would, just go check him out, Spotify, Facebook. Again, that is Vampire Stepdad.